one theme that I really want to hammer home, and I don't want to stop, and it's the theme of UFO secrecy and the death of the American Republic. That's my theme. I feel it's important, and because the more I look at the problem of UFO secrecy, the more I've become convinced that it's a significant contributor to the death of the kind of system in society that we all grew up believing that we had. It's not the only killer, but it's one. And it deserves its analysis and understanding, along with all the other bad things that are going on in this world today. And so that's what I wanted to talk about. And indeed, the theme that I'm dealing with today, I call it How UFO Secrecy Has Damaged Intellectual Life in Society, or Life in Society. It's basically new information. What never fails to amaze me regarding this topic, by the way, is how marginalized UFO research is. We all know this. But no matter how you look at it, whether from the point of view of pop culture or from the halls of academia and science, this is a topic that don't get no respect. In pop culture, I think UFOs are considered a myth in some form or another, typically. There are, of course, a few people who are in the know, let's say, and they have a different view of this, but I often will feel like I'm kind of howling into a vacuum. I'm sure many of you do as well. What is popular culture? This man here was a great thinker about 150 years ago named Jakob Burckhardt. Burckhardt was a very great, one of the greatest historians who ever lived. And he was a great philosophical thinker as well. And in the late 19th century, he wrote a book, I have a copy of it, called Force and Freedom. And what he did was to do a kind of sociological study of what he considered to be the three main forces in society that make it go. He called them culture, religion, and the state. And what he did in this study was to kind of understand how they reacted with each other. Now, that was a great idea, but the problem is when you think of culture today, where is, I mean, do we even have an independent culture? I have to wonder this. I wonder about this all the time. What I see is a culture that is not independent, but rather something that, we're bombarded with by a kind of all-pervasive media system, electronic media or print media that's, no matter what you encounter, 90% of what you encounter in the course of a day is owned by one of 5 corporations globally. And I don't see much independent culture anymore. So that the concepts that Burckhardt described then don't really apply. But when I talk about pop culture and we talk about UFOs, you have to recognize that to a large degree, what we consider to be popular culture is a set of concepts that are imposed from above. They're corporate imposed concepts. And it's not simply corporate, because when you go to the very top of the structure of power in our society, this is obviously the case that corporate and political powers and intelligence people and so on frequently will work together. How radical is that? 30 years ago, that's a radical statement. Today, it's like, yeah, big deal. We all know this. So gone are the days of Burckhardt, gone are the days of a largely independent culture. And yet, within such a culture, UFOs exist. How do they exist? Well, they're primarily a form of entertainment. Not all media are the same. In the ramp-up to the Peter Jennings ABC special, a number of people wrote to me, and they said, you wrote this article a year ago about UFOs in the media, and you said in that article that, mainstream media, it can never, ever, ever give up on the reality of UFOs, and yet here's Peter Jennings about to do so. What do you have to say about that? Do you think you need to revise your article? Someone asked me this. And I said, here's what's going to happen. It's going to be like a balloon. They're going to inflate the topic for the first hour, and they're going to deflate it for the second. And that's what happened.
And I kept saying, what the hell is that?
And this thing floated above our heads, doing about 30 miles an hour.
That's a good word, float. Yeah.
Floated, yeah, it floated. or had to have been defying gravity, or it was a lighter-than-air craft. I don't know. But it was triangular, it was monstrous. The moon and the stars went away, and there it was above us, and we stood and watched it go across the valley and head toward the mountains.
Not all media are the same, because there's no one society that we live in, right? You look at society in terms of wealth. If you take this room as the United States, let's say there's 100 people here, and all the wealth is $100. And if this were a communist utopia, we'd all hold hands, sing Kumbaya, and have $1 in our pocket. But of course, in our room, one person has 40 of the dollars. 19 more share another 45, and then the last 80 of you share $15. And in fact, actually, the last 20 of you have nothing. And the other 60 so have like 25 cents. That's our country. That's most countries.
A Harvard business professor and economist asked more than 5,000 Americans how they thought wealth was distributed in the United States. The ideal is as far removed from our perception of reality as the actual distribution is from what we think exists in this country. Here's that ideal we asked everyone about. Something like this curve. This isn't too bad. We've got some incentive, as the wealthiest folks are now about 10 to 20 times better off than the poorest Americans. But hey, even the poor folks aren't actually poor, since the poverty line has stayed almost entirely off the chart. We have a super healthy middle class with a smooth transition into wealth. And yes, Republicans and Democrats alike chose this curve. 9 out of 10 people, 92%, said this was a nice, ideal distribution of America's wealth. This is what people think America's wealth distribution actually looks like. Not as equitable, clearly, but for me, even this still looks pretty great. Yes, the poorest 20 to 30% are starting to suffer quite a lot compared to the ideal, and the middle class is certainly struggling more than they were, while the rich and wealthy are making roughly 100 times that of the poorest Americans, and about 10 times that of the still healthy middle class. Sadly, this isn't even close to the reality. Here is the actual distribution of wealth in America. The poorest Americans don't even register. They're down to pocket change, and the middle class is barely distinguishable from the poor. In fact, even the rich between the top 10 and 20 percentile are worse off. Only the top 10% are better off. And how much better off? So much better off that the top 2 to 5% are actually off the chart at this scale. And the top 1%, this guy, well, his stack of money stretches 10 times higher than we can show. Here's his stack of cash, restacked, all by itself. This is the top 1% we've been hearing so much about. So much green in his pockets that I have to give him a whole new column of his own, because he won't fit on my chart. 1% of America has 40% of all the nation's wealth. The bottom 80%, 8 out of every 10 people, or 80 out of these 100, only has 7% between them. And this has only gotten worse in the last 20 to 30 years. While the richest 1% take home almost a quarter of the national income today, in 1976, they took home only 9%, meaning their share of income has nearly tripled in the last 30 years. The top 1% own half the country's stocks, bonds, and mutual funds.
So within that society, and I'm not saying that's right or wrong, that's not my point, but in that room, there's a political system, a legal system, a media, and all these things that make it go. And all you have to do is ask yourself who's in the best position to manipulate these institutions for his benefit. And, right, the answer is implicit in the question. So with media also, what you have to do just like with elections every 4 years, you got to energize the bottom classes just enough so that they just barely participate in the way that you want them to elect their president. You don't talk about who owns what. You talk about, I don't know, abortion or flags or prayer in school or whatever. Things that get people worked up, but that don't really deal with the fundamental structure of power. And media, so you have media, there is management-oriented media for the top 10%, let's say, and then there's rabble-oriented media. Management media would be like NPR or New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Lehrer NewsHour, whatever. And maybe Rabble Media would be, I don't know, Fox News or New York Post, that type of thing. And so what I argue is that in media for the masses, hey, they can do UFOs all they want. History Channel sometimes does, Rabble Media, frankly. Well, just look at the commercials. If they're doing a Burger King ad, then you know what they're targeting. I have argued, and I maintain, that in a truly strictly management culture media, they are not going to give you reality of UFOs. They're not going to do it. Management culture requires ideological rigidity. You have to conform. You want to be part of the ruling group, you got to think like the ruling group.
And I want you all to know that we are fighting the fake news. It's fake, phony, fake. A few days ago, I called the fake news the enemy of the people, and they are. They are the enemy of the people.
And one thing you can't believe in is that aliens are down here doing stuff. That's off limits. And so that's this thing with the Peter Jennings special. They come down to he said, she said, right?
There are millions of people here on Earth who believe that intelligent life from outer space is visiting us. And they believe that they have seen the evidence.
It was so shiny, it looked like someone was shining a very bright light on a piece of aluminum.
The craft is disc-shaped, probably bigger than a 747.
And it arced over the top of our car. Then there was a third object even behind the first two.
So it came across and just stopped. It went back the direction it came from. This light went like this. That forever gave me the view that something other than us was out in the world.
There's no doubt that we're being visited. There is no doubt. They are definitely here.
That's what they all come down to. And the main thing about the Peter Jennings special, of course, is that there was no hint of conspiracy.
Been flying saucers?
It's coming this way. It is definitely coming this way. There is no doubt about it. This is weird.
In the Peter Jennings special, I mean, they dealt with abductions a bit.
Experienced is real. I know it because everybody else has seen it, talked about it, and discussed it. So I know for a fact it's real. I know for a fact it's real.
Okay. But there is really, primarily, then they bring out the SETI people, and you talk about, well, what if there's life out there? This is how UFOs are dealt with.
West of the Rockies, you're on the air. Hi.
Hey, Art. This is Matt in Colorado.
Hey, Matt.
Hey, got a sighting for you. It happened last summer.
Oh?
It was huge, a cigar shape.
The common cause of ufology is to finally determine what in the hell is flying in our skies.
It hurt your eyes, so I turned away. When I looked back, it's gone.
In this infantile, utterly childish manner, when we got serious things going on here, no hint of conspiracy, no hint of black world technology, no hint of mass criminality to fund such programs. I mean, think about how large the infrastructure of this might be. None of that. That's all off the books.
The UFO phenomenon, only a shadow of mainstream science.
Regarding scientific culture, the other, let's leave pop culture for a moment and let's deal with the more stratified people. UFOs are essentially banished. I will never forget, this is before I left the hallowed world of academia, chatting with a professor of history about the Kennedy assassination. Forget UFOs. Kennedy assassination was off limits. This is 1993, 94. And this professor was teaching a thing on this Kennedy assassination and arguing for the lone gunman theory, which I did not then subscribe to, nor do I now. And I said, well, come on. Are you kidding me here? And we talked a little bit, and he started to look at me. I could recognize the look, and the look was, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. And I stopped, That's Kennedy. Can you imagine UFOs in a university? We all know what happened to John Mack at Harvard, who was nearly censured and ruined by his so-called colleagues at Harvard University, who were so scandalized, good Lord, that one of their own attempt to study something as ridiculous as aliens.
Spacecraft. How would they or you know that what they saw was actually a spacecraft?
Often the person has not actually seen the spacecraft, but often they have. A number of these cases, when they're floated through the wall of their home, through the window, through the door, again, so many of the details of these experiences make no sense in our kind of the Newtonian, Cartesian, Western, whatever you want to call it, notions of reality, and yet the stories are consistently described with, again, the self-critical attitude that the people have, and they may see a typical unidentified flying object, a saucer-shaped or cigar-shaped vehicle on the ground of their home, emanating bright lights, or they may be taken by a small craft up into the sky to a kind of mothership, which they see very clearly. So many of them actually see the UFOs that and the insides are so uniformly described with rounded, curved walls and complicated instrument panels that it's become clear that it's some kind of craft in the sky, which they would naturally call a spacecraft.
I think people would naturally draw that inference, but to me it's still an inference. I think you might agree, we don't really know exactly what these things are.
So within this culture, and this is management culture, right? This is elite management culture, which is why ideological rigidity is so necessary. If you're going to rule, you've got to be part of the club. Hence the intense fear to this subject. It's not that they're all in on it. They're just all scared as hell. They don't want to break ranks. The result of such social pressures on people in science is that they make very, very foolish statements. The scientific approach is to ask the right questions. The scientific approach is not to fixate on why it can't be an alien craft. The scientific approach would be to investigate what it could be, okay, to inquire.
It is inconceivable to me, as somebody who served in the Ministry of Defense for 21 years, that one could receive credible reports and then dismiss them without some form of proper scientific investigation.
The point is that the banishment of UFO from the world of science and academia causes a lot of stupid things to be said by people with otherwise, very nice credentials.
It's definitely crazy to spend $22 million to research UFOs. Pilots are always going to see things that they can't identify, and we should probably look into them. But to identify them as UFOs, to target UFOs to research, that is not the priority we have as a national security matter right now.
But the thing is, unlike what academicians say and unlike what the scientists say, UFOs are not delusional. They're not nonsense. They are not here solely for the distracted ingestion by the masses. They're real.
Back in the early 80s, it was my job to confuse the UFO community. Those type of people you can convince that, listen, you can't tell anybody else about this because this, it could get in the wrong hands.
Would we use perception to help shroud what we're trying to protect? Absolutely. If you've got an aerial platform that is highly advanced and the public who happens to get a glimpse of the thing, if they're convinced that it's from Venus, then there's no way it could be our military. Well, hey, that's awesome. Hell yes.
It's been a cover story in the U.S. for a long time. Tell the media, tell anybody who will listen, that they're using UFOs to cover up advanced technology, when the truth is exactly the opposite of the words.
There are some things that we can say very confidently. There are some things that we can't say quite as confidently. What we can say with absolute confidence is that the UFO phenomenon has involved real technology doing real things that are not supposed to be possible.
Commander David Fravor still can't explain what he says he saw that day. November 2004, the Navy fighter pilot was on a training mission west of San Diego when he was ordered to check out something in the water not far away. On a clear day, over a smooth ocean, he saw the object, waves breaking over it, and says he saw something hovering above it.
It's randomly moving north, south, east, west, just random. Just stopping, going the other direction, like you could do with a helicopter, but a little bit more abrupt. It looks like a 40-foot-long Tic Tac with no wings.
Fravor says he and his four-man team tracked the object for several minutes until it just disappeared. Tonight, CNN has learned the Pentagon had a secretive program to research UFOs like the one Fravor spotted. The project was called the Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program, run by an official named Luis Elizondo.
I think this is a national security imperative. We have clear things that we do not understand how they work, operating in areas that we can't control.
And that's quite a lot right there. But there's more. This technology, since at least World War II, has engaged in a confrontational and at times provocative manner with U.S. military forces and with military forces of other nations on many occasions. It's involved airspace violations. It's involved alarmed responses. It has elicited the concern of some of the highest-ranking individuals within the military and intelligence community in this nation.
We've been able to explain them as hoaxes, as erroneously identified friendly aircraft, as meteorological or electronic phenomena, or as light aberrations. It is this group of observations that we now are attempting to resolve.
With all due respect to the Air Force, I believe that some of them will prove to be of interplanetary origin.
So whatever these objects are, they are a matter of national security. That we can say with absolute confidence.
Former Senator Reid tried to keep information about this entire program out of public view.
That's right, Wolf. The New York Times says Reid acknowledged to them that he and two other senators, Ted Stevens and Daniel Inouye, both deceased, did not want public debate on the Senate floor over this program. Reid told the Times that the funding for the project was so-called black money, meaning that was secret money for classified programs. They just didn't want it talked about.
We can thank the Freedom of Information Act for a lot of this knowledge. In particular, for a relatively brief period in American history, and I say the late 1970s up until about 1982, the Freedom of Information Act enabled researchers to obtain official documents from government agencies, which clearly demonstrated this. I'm not saying FOIA died after 1982, but Ronald Reagan did pushed through an executive order in 1982, April of 82, that significantly undercut the user-friendly nature of Freedom of Information Act.
The recent flurry of espionage indictments and convictions expresses our unwillingness to tolerate betrayal of the special trust given to those who guard the nation's secrets.
Freedom of Information Act, it's had its ups and downs, and it's in a down phase right now. However, during its up phase, not that it was ever easy to get everything out of the government, but it was at least possible. And we all know the story. For years and years and years, FBI, CIA, all the military agencies said, we don't know anything about UFOs. Suddenly, thousands of pages of documents come out proving the lie. And now it's true that among these official release documents, there is not a single smoking gun. There's not a memo from the president that says, what are we going to do about these pesky aliens? I'm talking about officially acknowledged documents that the government says, well, yeah, those are ours. Okay? And if you look at those, you've got many of these that are, as I say, one cut below the actual smoking gun. They're amazing documents. They describe utterly awesome military encounters with the unexplainable.
The Robertson panel was a group of scientists, radar experts, nuclear physicists, people that were brought together by the CIA to try and figure out how to deal with the UFO problem. The objective of the Robertson panel was already determined before they stepped into that room and started deliberating what that evidence showed. Many experts now look at the documents and say, well, they really weren't doing their job as true investigators. They were collecting these reports, analyzing them, and pretty much dismissing them one at a time. Weather balloon here, swamp gas there, the planet Venus over here. And they were just completely dismissing anything that came in.
This one I consider to be a very significant one. This is from Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico from January 31st, 1949. It's directed to the U.S. Air Force Chief of Staff. There was a flurry of UFO activity going on in New Mexico at this time. The document in question here described yet another of these sightings from the previous day. which had been seen by about 30 people. It states, so I'm going to read it to you, you can read it here, estimate at least 100 total sightings. AEC, AFSWP, 4th Army, local commanders, perturbed by implications of phenomenon. All appear to be same object at different points in trajectory. Unless instructed to contrary, this office will make all-out investigation with view to location of impact point, if any. Okay? All these agencies perturbed by implications of phenomena? That's pretty heavy stuff. Then there's an FBI memo from the same period, in fact, the same day. Same day that the Kirtland memo was issued, we have an FBI special agent sending a memo to FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. This is a famous memo. It states that the matter of UFOs was considered top secret, that's a direct quote, by intelligence officers of both the Army and Air Forces. Nothing more needs to be said on that right now. That states enough. Then we have this. A 1950 confidential memorandum with the heading Flying Discs. This is a remarkable, brief little document. And because it's so brief, I want to read each sentence kind of very carefully, so you can hear it carefully. Since July 30th, objects round in form have been sighted over the Hanford Atomic Energy Commission plant. Okay? Next. These objects reportedly were above 15,000 feet in altitude. Air Force jets attempted interception with negative results. Now listen to this. All units, including the anti-aircraft battalion, radar units, Air Force fighter squadrons, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation have been alerted for further observation. Next. The Atomic Energy Commission states that the investigation is continuing and complete details will be forwarded later.
There's a lot of evidence that points to what I call a clandestine group, people who have some quasi-affiliation with government and use certain government facilities, but operate in a rather very stealth and secret way that is not generally under high-level governmental control as far as we can tell. Yes, there has been ET visitation and may continue to be. There has been craft that have been recovered. There has been a certain amount of reverse engineering that has allowed some of these craft or some components to be duplicated, and that there are humanoids from our planet, Earthlings, who are utilizing some of this equipment in certain ways, and that perhaps a large part of the activity that's classified as UFO activity, abductions and a whole host of this type of activity, may very well not be due to ET activity at all. I would suspect if any is due to ET activity, it's a rather small part, and that a larger portion is due to humanoid type activity.
Of the thousands of UFO-related documents that we have gotten through the Freedom of Information Act, only the smallest handful of highly censored documents were actually top secret. The rest were typically classified as either restricted or confidential, or at most secret. And these are all lower levels of secrecy, in other words. So that if this report was ever made and was top secret, perhaps, it would look something like this to us, right? Despite the best efforts of Freedom of Information Act researchers, the best reports and best intelligence remain far removed from the public domain. Despite what people had hoped back in the day, the glory era of the late 70s, the Freedom of Information Act has not turned out to be a magic bullet. It's also fairly obvious that UFO secrecy involves classifications higher than top secret. You have higher classifications themselves are classified. Who knows how far they go? James Bamford wrote the book Body of Secrets. It's a study of the National Security Agency. Very, very good book. He writes, like an endless spiral, there are secret classification systems within secret classification systems. Just pause for a moment and reflect on that. Okay? Now, what we do know is that a Canadian government official back in the 1950s, Wilbert Smith, wrote in 1950, many of you know this, he said he had made discreet inquiries through the Canadian Embassy staff in Washington and learned that the subject of UFOs was, quote, the most highly classified subject in the United States government.
According to the United States Air Force, in following a policy which is set probably fairly high in the Pentagon, there are about 250 or 300 extremely incompetent airline and military pilots in this country. They're carrying passengers, they fly across the oceans, and they seem to be quite safe. The airlines let them continue to fly even though they have reported UFOs. Now, this is not an attack on the Air Force spokesman or the project spokesman. They are simply following orders to explain away all UFO sightings as quickly as possible when they become public and deny that UFOs really exist.
We're kind of in the position of the man who's asked, have you stopped beating your wife? This has been going on for 19 years. The charges are absolutely untrue. You could characterize them as being senseless and vicious. Our critics continually charge that the United States Air Force is withholding information from the general public on this subject. This is absolutely untrue. We are not hiding anything. We have nothing to hide. There is nothing in Air Force files, in either the classified files or the unclassified files, that come to a conclusion that spaceships have visited the Earth.
The Air Force Investigative Unit is known as Project Blue Book. UFO reports, hoax or serious sightings, wind up here at Wright-Patterson Airfield in Dayton, Ohio. It has studied over 10,000 UFO sightings and found explanations for most of them.
We have a situation in West Virginia. A family report has seen something falling from the sky. I'll get down there right away. I need you to meet someone first. Name's Dr. Alan Hynek.
You want me to investigate flying saucers?
I want you to help me prove to the public the truth. They don't exist.
The mystery into whether or not we're alone in the universe has been a constant question for over 6 decades, and it looks like the Defense Department wanted some answers. According to a report by the New York Times, the DoD funded an advanced aerospace threat identification program in order to investigate UFO reports.
This is from Robbins Air Force Base in Macon, Georgia. It's dated July 9th, 1951. This describes a 10-minute aerial UFO encounter that took place in the early afternoon. The pilot was a first lieutenant. He was flying an F-51 on a routine flight from Lawson Air Force Base in Columbus, Georgia. Not far from Augusta, Georgia, he encountered an object that he said was flat on top and bottom and appearing from a front view to have rounded edges and slightly beveled. That's a lot of detail. At one point, the object dived while in front of the pilot's view. And when it did that, he said it appeared, quote, completely round and spinning in a clockwise direction. Again, it's a lot of detail in his report here. He continues, the report says, from front view, as object dived, observer noted small spots on the object. Object did not appear to be aluminum. Only one object was observed, solar white. No vapor trails or exhaust or visible system of propulsion. Described as traveling at tremendous speed. That's all a direct quote from the memo. The object eventually disappeared under his plane. And when it went under his plane, he felt a bump, he said in this report. He thought it was about 10 or 15 feet in diameter. He said he got to within about 300 or 400 feet of it. I mean, it's just incredible detail. And it's one of the legacies. I would argue it's the legacy of Watergate that we know about it.
Here now, the next picture will be the President of the United States.
I have never been a quitter. To leave office before my term is completed is abhorrent to every instinct in my body. But as president, I must put the interests of America first. Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
And the plan was to get negative information about the potential nominee of the Democratic Party. But how are you going to get the negative information? A lot of people would say breaking into the Democratic National Committee was way out, off the charts. Yes, but not that far off.
It was as a result of Watergate and the end of Vietnam, I think, that the Freedom of Information Act was strengthened. And as a result of that, we get reports like this. It's very easy, that we could not have gotten it.
Since 1948, there have been thousands of sightings by commercial and military flight crews.
Project Magnet was authorized in December 1950 following a request made to the Canadian Department of Transport by myself for permission to make use of the department's laboratory and field facilities in a study of unidentified flying objects and physical principles which might appear to be involved. The conclusions reached by Project Magnet and contained in the official report were based on a rigid statistical analysis of sighting reports and were as follows. There is a 91% probability that at least some of the sightings are of real objects of unknown origin.
I mean, the people who made these reports back in the 50s, I would imagine they had no idea that these would see the light of day one day. Taken as a group, they established that during this early period, at the very least, there were quite a few events that were recorded and classified by American military and intelligence personnel that they took seriously. And it is not hard to understand why. What were these early UFOs? Were they Soviet? Maybe developed with the help of captured German scientists, some of whom appear to have been experimenting with disc-shaped aircraft. Okay? U.S. intelligence looked into this. Now, this is a tricky issue even to this day. Regarding the Soviet part of it, the answer seemed to be no. It seems to be no to me today as well. In other words, did the Soviets invent flying saucers after World War II or during World War II? Doesn't look like it. What about the Americans, though? What about the Americans? I mean, the Americans captured a lot of those smart German scientists. Well, people have been looking in this one for a long time as well, and, I don't know if I have the full answer on this. I don't know if anyone really does. The author, Nick Cook. Nick Cook was the senior aviation editor for Jane's Defense Weekly. It's about as mainstream conservative elite as you get.
In spite of Air Force intelligence claims there was nothing to worry about, the US Air Force was actually taking UFOs very seriously indeed.
And he looked into this. And he wanted to know, did the Germans create flying saucers? In his field, he said, we call it the legend. Well, it becomes clear when reading his book that there was very, very interesting research being done by the Germans during World War II in things like gravity research, for example. What he found, he did find some smoke, in other words, concepts and drawing board stuff. He did not find fire. He did not find evidence of anything operational, in other words. Now I'm talking about the 1940s and 50s. He speculated that it was possible that a major breakthrough would have occurred possibly as early as the 1960s. But even there, he was somewhat non-committal.
But what really fascinates me as a defense journalist is that you are as likely to find believers in UFOs among the higher reaches of the aerospace industry as you are in Hollywood. This is a report into future technology, commissioned in 1968 by McDonnell Douglas. What's extraordinary about this document is that it takes the existence of UFOs seriously. It recommends using UFOs and copying their design to make the next quantum leap in aerospace technology.
Some UFOs may be extraterrestrial vehicles. They certainly have not been proven otherwise. The existence of extraterrestrial vehicles indicates vehicles could be built which would have capabilities quite useful to McDonnell Douglas Corporation.
The report even suggested interviewing contactees to gather data. And if they were thinking that over 25 years ago, what advances might be on the horizon today?
I'm here in Seattle to meet someone who's built a device in the basement of his garage, indeed is flying it there, that he and others claim is able to do so by defying our current understanding of physics. As unlikely as it sounds, I'm wondering whether what I'm about to witness may just be our first small step towards the stars.
This strange device is made of balsa wood and glue and covered in a layer of aluminium foil.
So Tim, tell me, why is this lifter demonstrating this levitational effect?
Well, there's an interaction that occurs between the corona wire, which runs around the top, and then the foil underneath.
Yeah.
And there's a 3 to 4 centimeter air gap in between there, and literally a high voltage electric field occurring. Now, there's been some controversy. Is this an ion wind effect? Is it the high voltage literally taking air molecules with it and creating an upward thrust? Or is it something more?
Nobody knows for sure how the lifter flies, but one popular theory is that high voltage current flows between the wires, suspended on the top of the craft, through the air, down to the aluminium foil wrapped around the frame. The current literally drags air molecules down with it, creating a downforce, called an ion wind, which provides the thrust needed to lift the airframe skywards.
This technology, not just the lifter, but this whole scope of technologies, is almost like looking at the internal combustion engine back in the 1800s. We're trying to take it and say, look, these are real technologies. They have the same flaws that any other technology does, but hopefully they can do things that other technologies can't.
What documentation we have indicates serious efforts going on in anti-gravity starting in the mid-1950s. If anything started sooner than this, we have no documentary evidence. That's not to say it did not happen. Now, the other problem that I have with the theory of flying saucers as some kind of deep black U.S. project, at least in the early years, my problem is, why were so many of these encounters with U.S. military personnel so provocative? Now, you can always speculate that there's a truly rogue human group that invented or obtained radically advanced technology. I mean, a group beyond the control of official militaries and official governments, okay? And indeed, it is my feeling that such has become the case today. I say feeling, I cannot prove this. Could it be the answer to the sightings of the 1940s and 1950s? I'll concede it's possible, but there remains a matter of evidence, and I am not aware of any. Now, that's a conservative interpretation of the situation. That is a human solution. And it's not exactly conservative. The more radical interpretation, of course, is that this technology was not human in origin at all. Either way, this is obviously a serious matter to very serious people. H. Marshall Chadwell was the CIA's deputy director of scientific intelligence in 1952. It's a very brief document prepared by Chadwell for his boss, CIA Director Walter Beadle Smith. Smith, who was, by the way, the chief of staff for Eisenhower during the war. Memos dated December 2nd, 1952. Chadwell was careful. The man was not a fool. He didn't come out and say, "Boss, we're being invaded." Here's the relevant paragraph. At this time, the reports of incidents convince us that there is something going on that must have immediate attention. Sightings of unexplained objects at great altitudes and traveling at high speeds in the vicinity of major U.S. defense installations are of such nature that they are not attributable to natural phenomena or known types of aerial vehicles. Wow. It takes your breath away. Not natural phenomena, not known types of vehicles, and not apparently U.S. manufactured. Didn't seem like it in that memo. Didn't appear to be Soviet. So what does that leave you with? And it leaves you with someone's technology snooping around American airspace. This is clearly a matter of grave concern to the decision makers of America's defense and intelligence policy. With that in mind, we must assume that the public statements repeated over and over and over, that flying saucers exist only in the imagination, they're nothing to them, hoaxes or misidentifications of natural whatever, okay? That these are intentional acts of deception. Intentional acts of deception. Now, you can defend that if you wish. You can say the government's trying to prevent mass panic, if you want to do that, or hide its knowledge from the Soviets, okay? Or maybe something else equally portentous, all right? But before you draw that conclusion, let's go a little further. Now, the Freedom of Information Act documents, as important as they are not the whole story. Unfortunately, we're a bit of a handicap here. I just can't walk into the Pentagon and say, hey, can I take a look at these things? Can't walk into CIA.
When President Obama came into office, he promised that his administration would be one of the most transparent ever.
Transparency and the rule of law will be the touchstones of this presidency. And we've put in place higher standards of transparency. This is the most transparent administration in history.
Was it?
Not by any stretch of the imagination. Things went backwards under him, and under Trump, it's only getting worse.
The government can deny your request for some legit reasons.
So if there is a national security issue surrounding what I'm asking for, I can't get it. If there's personally identifiable information in there, I can't get it. If it's an ongoing law enforcement investigation, I can't get it.
And then you can get blocked for some non-legit reasons.
One of the exemptions that I always joke about that I feel like has existed for a while is the embarrassment exemption. Is they look at these things and they're like, this is going to embarrass us.
And that's not a legitimate exemption.
No. If there is no exemption and it is super embarrassing, we have the right to have it. And so you see them, the political actors in these offices, figure out ways to not give us these things or to slow walk us to the point where we'll give up.
A certain number of documents, though, have been obtained to review. It's true.
I will tell you unequivocally that through the observation, scientific methodologies that were applied to look at this phenomena, that these aircraft, we'll call them aircraft, are displaying characteristics that are not currently within the U.S. inventory nor in any foreign inventory that we are aware of.
We have to be resourceful. You can't just be a historian, you have to be a journalist. You have to seek out people who have something to say on this matter. You have to judge their credentials. You have to check their facts. You have to try to keep piecing the story together. This is not an infallible process. Everyone knows this, but it's necessary. And you have to rely on your best judgment and your sense of caution throughout. And thus we come to the strong reason to believe that UFOs are a lot more than just objects flying around in the sky, but are in fact retrieved technology that is being stored and studied and perhaps duplicated at secret bases. We come to this likelihood that there are alien bodies as well that have been studied by human scientists. And we come to this amazing conclusion because more than 50 years of history point inexorably toward it. There's Roswell, of course. Roswell, because it's so rich, so full of witness testimony, so portentous for its implications. Debunking it has been an absolute priority since the case arose. Roswell will not go away, however. But even if you want to ignore Roswell, if you insist on ignoring Roswell, in my opinion, it doesn't really matter. There have been multiple retrievals of UFO technology by the U.S. military, many in which U.S. military teams worldwide have been retrieving what are genuine UFOs. People have leaked information about this from time to time.
Now, just a short time ago, Senator Reid responded to CNN saying he's, quote, proud of this program and its groundbreaking studies. Speak for themselves, he says. Reid says it's silly and counterproductive to politicize the serious questions raised by the work of the UFO program. The head of that aerospace firm, Robert Bigelow, did not respond to CNN's multiple requests for comment by our deadline. Wolf?
Brian, there's also information that former Senator Reid tried to keep information about this entire program out of public view.
That's right, Wolf. The New York Times says Reid acknowledged to them that he and two other senators, Ted Stevens and Daniel Inouye, both deceased, did not want public debate on the Senate floor over this program. Reid told the Times that the funding for the project was so-called black money, meaning that was secret money for classified programs. They just didn't want it talked about.
I mentioned Wilbert Smith a little while ago. Well, he made another remarkable statement on this. He said, shortly before he died, in the very early part of the 1960s, Smith said that during the great wave of UFO sightings in 1952, U.S. military shot off a piece of a flying saucer near D.C. He said that the U.S. Air Force had loaned him a small piece for a very short time, in his words. He showed it to his friend, U.S. Navy Rear Admiral H.B. Knowles. When Smith was asked if he returned the piece to the Air Force, he replied, he said, not the Air Force, much higher than that. He was asked, well, was it the CIA? And he chuckled, and he said, I'm sorry, gentlemen, I don't care to go beyond that point. I can say to you, it went into the hands of a highly classified group. You will have to solve that problem, their identity, for yourselves. But let's talk a little bit about Edgar Mitchell. He's talked publicly about this for a couple of years. I'm not telling you anything he hasn't said. He has said that he has more than one elite connection. Now look, when you're a moonwalking astronaut, who's not going to want to talk to you, right? So you can basically talk to anybody you want. He said two of these very elite individuals confirmed to him independently of each other the existence of deep black programs to study alien technology and bodies.
Over the last 50 years at least, and more, a great deal of secrecy surrounding the so-called UFO event. It's a very complex subject. We're not dealing with something that's very simple here. If we take well, we have sightings of all sorts. We've been reported thousands and thousands of sightings for 50 years or so. Large numbers of those sightings are indeed misperceiving natural phenomena in some way. But a large number of them are not misperceiving. They seem to be well-documented events that represent flying craft that do not match anything we have in an earthbound arsenal.
This is a woman who is the former Assistant Secretary of Housing and Urban Development under the administration of George Bush in the early 1990s, 41st President, Poppy Bush. This is Catherine Austin Fitts, who, after leaving government, has become, in my opinion, one of the leading analysts of the black budget. She wrote a great article called What's Up with the Black Budget. I would encourage every one of you to read it. Just Google it, you'll find it. She described a meeting. Listen to this. She described a meeting she had in 1998. This is after she left the Bush administration, right? With John Peterson, who is head of the Arlington Institute, a very important military think tank, okay, in Washington.
We're living at a time of extraordinary, unprecedented change. In almost any dimension, any sector that you look at, you see exponential, amazing kind of change, unlike anything humanity and this planet has ever seen before. My guess is that you probably have breakthroughs in terms of anti-gravity and levitation and other such things, because you can't sustain the kind of this rate of change and where this is all going without having big breakthroughs across everywhere.
She says, according to that he asked her to help him on a high-level strategic plan that the Institute was working on for the Undersecretary of the Navy. Here are her words to the meeting. There's Catherine Austin Fitts. I'm going to read it to you. She says, I met with a group of high-level people in the military in the process, including the undersecretary. According to John, the purpose of the plan discussed in front of several military or retired military officers and former government officials was to help the Navy adjust their operations for a world in which it was commonly known that aliens exist and live among us. John asked me if I would like to meet some aliens. John asked me if I would like to meet some aliens. For the only time in my life, I declined an opportunity to learn about something important. I was concerned that my efforts with Arlington could boomerang. I regret that decision. People have asked John Peterson to confirm this, and he will not confirm this meeting. During and immediately after World War II, U.S. military personnel began encountering exotic, unconventional, and extraordinary craft. It quickly became apparent to the best and brightest minds that these did not come from the Soviet Union. They did not come from here. They figured it out. They certainly concluded that the true UFOs did not come from our civilization. Hardly willing to share this information with others, secrecy became the rule. Now, at some point very early on, alien technology and bodies were recovered. It would be of paramount importance to determine several things as quickly as possible. A, the intentions of these others, whatever they want. B, how to exploit their technology. C, how to keep the information away from undesirable groups, which I guess would be just about everybody. Now, the reason for secrecy is going to be a lot more than just preventing mass panic or stopping you from jumping out of your window. Okay? It's not for public protection. I just do not believe this. Maybe in the beginning, maybe in the very beginning, there was a kind of War of the Worlds fear scenario, like what happened with Orson Welles. Maybe people were afraid of panic. But you know what? Secrecy grows its own tentacles, and it develops its own reasons for self-preservation. And I believe that by the 1950s, it's quite possible that the office of the presidency was beginning to lose control over UFO secrecy. I mean, imagine being one of these people charged with managing the UFO problem. Okay, you've got to keep it secret. You have to keep it so secret, you have to basically hide it from yourself, in a way. There's layer upon layer of deception that follows, false cover story on top of false cover story. We can assume that the technology itself would have to be amazingly advanced, maybe hopelessly so compared with maybe what we had in 1950. But maybe, maybe after a few years, one clever scientist comes up with a really cool idea based on one aspect of the recovered technology. Not only an incalculable technological advantage in the Cold War, but hey, hell of a ground floor investment opportunity. And over the years, much of the UFO information would have gone, I think, to private channels. Good way to keep secrets. It's immune from government, from public, inquiry. It becomes proprietary. I mean, look, this has happened with so many other aspects of the military. Our military has become privatized in almost every conceivable way, including combat duties. In Iraq and elsewhere in the world. Why not with UFOs? You got Wackenhut. I mean, there's private contractors who are dealing with this and who do get the information. If I'm a senior Air Force guy and I don't want anyone to have these UFO documents, hey, maybe I'll give them to a buddy of mine in General Motors or at Lockheed or some other place, and I'll say, hey, hang on to these, please, okay? And they become impossible to get. But they're still within, general circulation among the people who really need to know. I think that's how it works, frankly. Now, the value of this technology, I think potentially, and certainly in reality, is immense. I spoke to a man. He's not anonymous. He's a real guy, and he's got real black world credentials. He said to me, he's a tough guy. I wouldn't want to mess with him, to be honest with you. It was in his 60s, mid-60s. He says, you know what they're guarding out at Area 51? They're guarding money. An enormous amount of money. Money, he said, in the form of immensely valuable alien technology. And something else seems to have occurred along the way. According to the former head of Lockheed Skunk Works, the late Ben Rich, apparently, direct control over the UFO problem was removed from the U.S. presidency around 1969, maybe. Since that time, private international channels have been dominant. Who can confirm this? No one. I can't confirm this. But it would be consistent with the ascendancy of international corporations and international elites over most other aspects of global power. Why not this? What it looks like is that UFO secrecy has led to the establishment of a secret network which controls access to ET technology. The network is international, but it uses substantial resources of the U.S. black budget and other secret military groups as a primary tool to engineer exotic technologies that enable it to maintain scientific, military, and economic superiority. Yes, that's what it looks like. So we need to re-examine the major events of our history, and we need to try to understand them in light of this. UFO reality makes our actual history vastly different from what we have been taught in the standard books. With the existence of a secret and extremely powerful group controlling this subject and everything that concerns it, a massive disinformation network has become necessary for them. Who knows how far this disinformation has gone? This in itself is a critical part of the reason UFO secrecy has helped to kill off the American Republic. Such levels of deception go beyond mere secrecy, and they make it necessary to toss out the old system in all but name. I'm not done with that theme, but let me continue. Science bought and paid for. You know, we always tend to think about concepts, and we're outdated. By the time we become adults, we're usually thinking about the world in terms of outdated concepts because we tend to maintain the concepts that we're taught about the world that we learn in our youth or in our formative period. But the problem is that life keeps going and we sometimes don't keep up, especially during periods of rapid change like this one. It's an unavoidable problem. We remain wedded to the concepts of the past, of our youth.
If you go back 500 years, not much happened in a century. Now a lot happens in 6 months. Technology feeds on itself and it gets faster and faster. It's going to continue, and in about 40 years it's going to be moving so fast, the pace of change is going to be so astonishingly quick that you won't be able to follow it unless you enhance your own intelligence by merging with the intelligent technology we're creating.
Reality races ahead. You look at our cultural attitudes towards science. You know, we think of science as a bastion, indeed, the foundation of intellectual freedom in the world. That's what we tell ourselves. We think of science as an independent search for truth, as the destroyer of social and religious myths and prejudices. But how independent is science? How independent are scientists? Maybe that's a better question. In whose interest is science practiced today? It's not an idle question. We don't have days of scientists just following their intellectual passions in the search for truth. A couple of years ago, I came across this statement by one of the pioneers in environmental science, James Lovelock. Lovelock was in his 80s when he wrote this. This is what he wrote. Nearly all scientists are employed by some large organization, such as a government department, a university, or a multinational company. Only rarely are they free to express their science as a personal view. They may think that they're free, but in reality they are, nearly all of them, employees. They have traded freedom of thought for good working conditions, a steady income, tenure, and a pension. He's not even talking about UFOs, he's just talking in general here. Hey, science is expensive. You need sponsorship. Who's paying for scientific research in this country and in this world? What projects get the most funding? It's very difficult to get organized or to organize data around for who's paying for scientific research in the U.S., much less the world. UFO research, who's paying for this? U.S. federal budget, fiscal year 2006 is $2.5 trillion, guys. How much goes to UFO research? That's a zero. Zero. Now, black budget, different story. Different story. I don't know how much money is going to it. I'll bet you a lot. And what is the black budget? Catherine Austin Fitts talks about this at great length. I really encourage you to search her, go to her website, and read about this. She is the most insightful person on this whole topic, in my opinion. She says, she argues, it's not just secret federal money. There's a lot of money going on. You've got, just before 9/11, Rumsfeld's before Congress trying to explain why $1.1 trillion was unaccounted for. They called it undocumentable expenses in the Pentagon in fiscal year 2000.
From the best stealth planes to top secret helicopters caught on tape. B-2 Spirit, status declassified. Bird of Prey, status retired. F-117, status retired. SR-71, status retired. Colonel Jim Watkins from the U.S. Air Force had this to say about the SR-71. The plane had no problem traveling coast to coast USA in 67 minutes.
The budget for the Pentagon that year was $350 billion. How are you going to get $1.1 trillion going through the Pentagon in that year? Where'd the money come from? Where'd it go? We don't know. Then came 9/11. Now you can't ask. Now you literally cannot find out.
The Pentagon has secured a $630 billion budget for next year, even though it's failed to even account for the money it's received since 1996. A whopping $6.5 trillion of taxpayer cash have gone to defense programs, none of which has been audited. And this black budget has sparked concerns over political fraud.
What has happened is the secrecy on UFOs has required control by a very elite group of people to circumvent this standard form of government that we all thought we had, okay? And what happens over a long enough period of time is you go farther and farther away from what you officially have and what really you have, and at a certain point, just like the stock market has to have a correction when you have economic realities all screwed up with each other, same thing with politics. You have a correction. 9/11 provided that correction. Whether you want to think it was an inside job or not, let's not even discuss that right now. After 9/11, we have seen a new form of government come down in this country. Make no mistake. And it's a correction, just like economics. Because the real form of government had already gone so far beyond what we thought we had, that the correction was necessary for those who rule. You know, this way now you know your Fourth Amendment right to privacy is gone, of course. Maybe it was gone before 9/11, but now it's officially gone, and things like that, okay? It's not like the government wasn't doing all kinds of bad things before, but now they're just allowed to do it more officially. I think of the analogy, very, very strong analogy with the old Soviet Union. Remember 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev comes to power. Glasnost, perestroika. Hey man, that's great. Gorby's Man of the Year twice by Time magazine. 6 years later, no more Soviet Union, goodbye. What happened? I'll tell you what happened. I know what happened. Okay? He comes up, revolutionizes society, openness. People say, hey, great, man, we don't want to be in this country. We're gone. You took us over in 1940, remember? And Gorby is saying, no, I didn't mean that. Well, it's too late. Reforms spiraled out of control in such a manner. The President of the United States must not ever come up and say, sorry, come to my attention, aliens apparently are here, UFOs appear to be real. You can't half disclose. You can't be half pregnant, you can't half disclose. Because if you start bringing out disclosure, okay, everything connected with it comes out too. The massive illegality, that what appears to be connected to UFO secrecy is going to come out. It's going to come out. And when that comes out, all hell is going to break loose. That's not a reason not to do it. That's a reason to do it. We have got to force their hand. That's what good research is all about. That's what I am trying to do. That is what other good people here are trying to do. Thank you very much.